Yes, welcome into the swing. We're back. Badgers get back on track with a blowout of Nebraska after falling at UCLA earlier in the week. They also did beat USC since the last time we had a show. So they 2-1 over this last 3-game stretch, and now they'll have a big one coming up here on Wednesday as they travel to Maryland, take on the Terrapins, who escaped Bloomington with a impressive win, I guess, down the stretch. Indiana's going to have a new coach at some point, right, Jesse? I mean, there's just no way that Mike Woodson's making through this.
I would have to think so. The standard there is pretty high, so we're not playing well. People take notice.
We got plenty to talk about, though. Obviously, Wisconsin and the way that John Tonje bounced back after the scoreless effort against USC. Kamari McGee continues to be just an absolute delightful story. I think we could both say that. We both enjoyed having him on the last time we did a show, and he's continued to hit from deep at a very high clip. So we're going to get into all that. We'll get into your questions as well. Before we do, just want to remind you that if you're listening, you can also watch us up on YouTube. We're posting the episodes. We have the camp YouTube page. The swing is a part of that as well. So just go search the camp or on YouTube and you'll find it and subscribe. We would appreciate that. And also, we are brought to you in part by Home Field Apparel. They have the best vintage apparel anywhere in the country or anywhere in the world. Anywhere in the world. They've got every single college you could possibly want. And go check them out, homefieldapparel.com. Use the promo code Bucky24 for 15% off your first purchase. All right. So, welcome home, Connor Essegian. Welcome home. And Wisconsin just absolutely dominates Nebraska. It was a game of runs, though, right? Like, it was at least entertaining, especially in the first half. Wisconsin gets out to a 19-2 run. Nebraska answers with the run of their own to get within 3. And then Wisconsin answers with a 16-2 run. And then Nebraska scores the final 5 points of the first half. The second half, not so much. Nebraska had no answer for Wisconsin's runs, and that's why you win by the margin that Wisconsin did.
Yeah, Connor Essegian came back off the bench, buries his first 3. I thought he was going to go off. If he makes his first one sometimes, as we've seen in a couple of years here at Wisconsin, he's going to have a day. Did not have a day. Went 2 for 7 from 3, finished with 8 points. I think in the end, he made the right decision very clearly to go to a place where they could get up and down and he could perhaps focus more on offense. But Wisconsin absolutely annihilated the Cornhuskers and did it with the way that we've seen this whole season. 17 3-pointers made. Any other year, you'd say that is absolutely absurd, and I do not believe you. I want to check the tape, but they got it.
Sorry, what'd you say?
Huh?
What'd you say?
I said in any other year, if you heard Wisconsin made 17 threes, you'd say, I do not believe you. But 6 different guys made it. They just are relentless. The tempo that they're playing at is as fast as any Wisconsin team we've seen in a long, long time. And this was a good win for them, even if Nebraska came in with 5 straight losses. Wisconsin was coming off a loss that, you make 15 threes. You think, how is it possible that you could lose? But the Badgers bounced back in a good way and it really have themselves in a good spot here as we get to February and March to position themselves well for the NCAA tournament.
You mentioned like the 17 threes. You wouldn't believe it. I think the more astonishing thing is it's not the most threes they've hit this year. Right? 21 threes, obviously, against Arizona, which was a Big Ten record and certainly a school record. But coming back at 17, 32 over the last 2 games, and they score exactly 83 points in both of them. One of them gets you a blowout win. The other one, you lose. So what was the difference? Well, their defense locked in against Nebraska, and I thought that they have taken steps there significantly. I don't know that we've maybe outside of that little stretch where Nebraska came back and Wisconsin's offense stalled a little bit. Maybe you could point to the defense, but otherwise that was as good a defensive performance as they've had against a major conference opponent this year, right?
Yeah, I would think so. And there was a stretch where Wisconsin went, 6 minutes without a field goal, which is atypical this year. We certainly grew accustomed to that the last couple of years, especially when they were falter. I think back to the NIT loss, the championship loss, when they went 8 minutes or something without a bucket and then realized they needed to perhaps change some things. And they have a lot. But yeah, Nebraska's not playing good basketball, but Wisconsin was able to step up defensively. And I think this team has it in them. And if we look at the postseason, they're probably going to have to win some games that are much higher scoring, but they're also going to have to play sound defensively in some of these different types of matchups. So they at least have it in them to be able to do that. But I would also say when you play at a faster tempo, means there's going to be a handful of more possessions in a game. And so Wisconsin is at least able to overcome some of those defensive mistakes because they can score more.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're up to 7th in the efficiency rankings in terms of offensive for KenPom, and I know they're up there in T rank as well. I wanted to go back before the 3-pointers thing. I wanted to go back to that. That's the 11th game that they've had a double-digit number of 3-pointers this year. It's 11. That's 11 out of 20. They're hitting a double-digit number of threes in more than 50% of their games, and that's through 20 games. The most that I found for an entire season going back to 1994-95 was 12. They're going to obviously smash that. And they're going to smash a lot of records this year offensively. Certainly going to likely going to smash the free throw record, going to break which not just Wisconsin's or the Big Ten's, the NCAA's very good shot at breaking that. And then certainly school records in terms of 3-pointers made, and we'll see what happens with the free throws made. But this is a very, very good offensive team and efficient. It's not just jacking up a lot of shots these days. They're going in, which was not always the case. I mean, what were they at? They were like 32% from three there for a stretch, and now they're up over 36. So it's a darn good offense, and you have to like it. But the other aspect of it, and this was what Greg Gard talked about after the game, was, yes, offensively efficient. I think he wanted to be in the top 10. And defensively, they wanted to be in the top 25, and they're moving their way up in that aspect of it as well. I mean, they're still sitting. I think they're sitting at 50 right now in KenPom, but that's an improvement over where they were just a few weeks ago.
Right. From a offensive standpoint, like they were averaging over 27 threes a game, which is going to be a program record. And when you take that many, you'd like to think you should hit 10 plus, but we know that's not always the case. The fact they've got so many different guys who can hurt you is what stands out offensively. That you have all 5 starters for most of this season have been averaging in double figures, which doesn't happen very often here. But it will come down in the end to defensive efficiency and how you can play in some of those different types of matchups. But it's certainly been entertaining to watch. And from a tempo standpoint, I was looking at this too, like going back to KenPom. It may not seem like much, but their adjusted tempo is 151st in the country. If you look at last year, if my numbers are right, they were 304th. So you're getting a handful more possessions. You're much more efficient. That is a significant leap, even if in the grand scheme, you don't think 151 is very fast. Wisconsin traditionally was near the bottom every year in like the 330s. So it's really been astounding the transformation they've made.
Yeah, I mean, it is very much so. And I was just looking at where they are in T rank before we what am I even looking at here? That's projections. I don't want projections. Wisconsin right now sitting 5th in T ranks adjusted offensive efficiency rankings, and 54th in defense. So by almost any measure, it's very, very impressive what they're doing offensively. But there are going to be tougher games and tougher teams coming up. That started with Maryland on Wednesday with the way that they're playing, extremely impressive. But John Tonje, this is a guy who was scoring at will, felt like earlier in the year, and then took a little bit of for a stretch here in January, took a little bit of a dive down as John Blackwell kind of was going up, and then he scores none against USC, and they got the win. So that, it is what it is. But then the last 2 games, back-to-back 20-point games, I believe that's 6 so far in the year in terms of 20 plus points in a game. And he was just on fire on Sunday against Nebraska. Very, very impressive. And him and John Blackwell together, those two, when you have essentially 2 number 1 options that you can turn to, it's going to be tough.
This version of Tonje makes Wisconsin incredibly dangerous in the postseason because he's got guys around him that can help. Because he's a 3-level scorer. He got going from 3. He's had a couple ridiculous dunks, including one against Nebraska. So he can get there, and his free throw percentage, as we've talked about throughout the season, is absurd, which is a big reason why Wisconsin leads the country in free throw percentage. I don't know necessarily that he's going to get 27 every night against tougher competition, but even the fact that he's put all this on tape makes defenses have to account for him more. And so if you want to try to take him away, well, then that frees up a guy like John Blackwell or some of these bigs. And he's just been everything and more Wisconsin could have hoped for when it went and got him out of the transfer portal.
Is he the – probably shouldn't do this because there's a lot of names out there. Is he the best transfer Wisconsin's ever had?
Well, I guess the good news, if trying to break this down, is it's not a huge list because this is relatively new. I mean, who else would you put on that Mount Rushmore? AJ Storr, obviously. I don't know that they've had a ton of guys, and there's probably some names that escape me, but way back when you had to sit out a year. So
yeah. So my only, and we're forgetting people. I'll admit it. My basketball history is not as good as my football history in terms of just like being able to recall things. However, I think that a guy like John Bryant, who was a fine player, but what he did in the tournament, a run to the Final Four, kind of has to put him up there somewhere. I mean, I believe he was the most valuable player, or most outstanding player, whatever they call it in the NCAA tournament for the region that year. So he probably has to go up there somewhere. We're blanking, and this could be bad because I guarantee there's just someone so obvious and we're missing it. Probably shouldn't have asked the question.
Well, I would say the jury is still out because if he does something like that in the NCAA tournament, then we know how guys are remembered for how they perform then.
Right.
But absolutely, based on what he's done so far, he leads the team in scoring. He's one of the best free throw shooters in the country. I certainly think his impact, AJ Storr had a tremendous impact on kind of the start of what this offensive transformation is, but Tonje gives you a little bit more in a variety of ways. So I would certainly put him at the top at this point.
Sharif Chambliss, a guy who transferred from Penn State and was a starter on that 2005 team that went to the Elite Eight. So again, you're right. It's not a huge number that you can, that really stands out because you do have to come in and sit out, and Bo wasn't necessarily somebody that was always going to go out and do that, go out and grab somebody and bring them in.
Yeah, he was not thrilled with people who would leave and go somewhere else. Yeah, it's a different time. So we're kind of just at the beginning of this, but no question, Tonje's impact has been, if you look across the landscape, what could you make a case? I don't know where he would rank, but certainly one of the most impactful, important transfer portal additions all offseason for any team in the country.
Well, yeah, it's not AJ Storr.
No, it's certainly not. But at least he's getting paid in the Escalade.
He is getting paid. Which is great. That's awesome. He probably is going to go find another place to play next year and get paid again before eventually moving on, or eventually ending up wherever it is going to be. I don't have any ill will towards him. No. Go get your money. We believe. Maybe we were talking about this at this time last year. Maybe like he's an NBA type of player. I don't know that I don't think he is. I don't think he's got that type of skill. His handle is probably not what it needs to be, and he's certainly not a good enough shooter. I don't see him like being a 3-and-D guy, so because he doesn't play defense. So like there's some holes in the game a little bit with AJ Storr. But that said, yes, John Tonje's been fantastic, and you look at the guys that left, whether it's Connor Essegian or Chucky Hepburn or AJ Storr or Gus Yalden. I think Chucky's the only one that is. I guess you could give Connor some. He's playing. He's scoring. He's doing better than he did last year because he wasn't getting any playing time last year. But Chucky's like the only one that I would sit there and say, "My goodness, he's having a hell of a season."
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. It says a lot about Wisconsin as a program that you can lose a guy like that and be okay. It says a lot about John Blackwell too, but everyone else around him that Wisconsin has put itself in position. I was just doing a radio hit with Ebo, and he was asking me a question about like, is Wisconsin doesn't get the respect it deserves in the national media and all that stuff. And maybe, but if I look back, would you have put Wisconsin higher than tied for 12th in this 18-team Big Ten? There were so many questions. They had 6 new players. You lost a 3-year starting point guard. I didn't think it was unreasonable to believe they were going to be in the bottom half, but it just says a lot about this program, what they've been able to do this year and reload the way they have.
That was one of the listener questions that I was going to throw out later on was, why did everybody miss on this? And why did we miss on this? And, it's really, really difficult in this era, as I think you said, that trying to evaluate what kind of player John Tonje is going to be for you. I mean, Greg Garr can sit there and say, yeah, well, he's going to be great, or he's going to do this and he's going to do that. But he said that about other guys in the past, and it doesn't always come true. So, you have to at least take that. There's a little bit of a grain of salt you have to take away. So, or you said you have to take it with a grain of salt, that he may end up being great, may end up not being great. You just don't know. And you don't know how everyone's going to gel. But I think the thing about it is that's going to continue to happen in this era where we just don't know, because you're throwing new players into new systems and there's so much uncertainty and so much unknown about every team coming into a year. Like, you think about Arizona starting where they did and now where they're at right now. And again, they had a good stretch to get back to where they where some people thought they should be. But this is extremely, extremely difficult. I think it's more difficult than football. I do, because one or two guys can make such a huge difference in basketball, as opposed to maybe needing 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 guys, or that one big quarterback to make such a huge difference in football.
I think that's fair. There's a few things on this topic. First of all, I think a good example of this is John Calipari at Arkansas, because before the season, I looked at the talent. I was like, oh my God, he did it again. I know they haven't really been great at Kentucky or before, obviously things ended very badly, but look at that talent. They could be a Final Four team. They're horrible. It's harder than ever to project on paper, because you don't know how a team is going to come together. And as we bring it back to Wisconsin, completely fair where they were picked because of all the questions that we had. I didn't know John Tonje was going to average 16, 17 points per game, put up 41, put up 33. He barely played because he was hurt at Missouri, and he was a very good player at Colorado State 2 years earlier, but you don't know how it's going to translate in terms of that leap. I didn't know Kamari McGee was going to be the type of player that he is. Nobody saw that coming. The guy shot 27% from 3, and now it's like he can't miss. And we did have him on the show. We talked about how hard he worked, but a lot of people work hard, and it doesn't necessarily translate. You can go down the list of guys. If I, before the season, had to say who I felt was the most exciting player, the guy I was most intrigued to see, it was Daniel Freitag. He hasn't played a minute because he's not in that spot right now. A true freshman who just needs some time, some seasoning. It's faster here at this level. But that just shows how difficult it is to project. And even the 3 transfers that they brought in, we haven't seen Cam Hunter at all. I know that he was battling an illness earlier in the season, but I thought there's guys.
Yeah.
What's that?
I don't think he was dressed yesterday.
So, before the year, I would have thought, well, they're bringing him here to be the starting point guard. And obviously that's not how it's materialized. So I think this is a really good example this year about why it is so difficult to project. There are going to be years where it's easier because you return more. But when you have 6 new scholarship players, that's a pretty significant chunk of your team.
It definitely is. The Daniel Freitag thing is also something that I got questions about, because he didn't get in in a near 30-point game and did not get in yesterday. So, a lot of people think he's gone already. Which, again, we get those questions all the time, just because of the nature of what college basketball is, what college athletics is if you're not happy, you're gone. I don't view him that way, though. I think he has a really good relationship with Greg Gard. I think that is as important as anything. And I think Greg's going to be honest with him, and it's going to take a little bit more. I'll be honest. I'm surprised that he didn't get in yesterday. You're in that situation. You got all these other guys, non-scholarship guys getting in, and he didn't. But I don't think that that's an indication of where he's at mind-wise. He's still very, very engaged in this on the sideline, and John Blackwell's like, your time's coming soon, and all that stuff. And I guess Connor Season was still very, involved on the sideline last year as well. Different situation. I think Daniel Freitag understands what it's going to take to get on the court, and he knows that it's probably going to take a little bit of time still for it to happen. But of all the surprises, who is like the biggest surprise? Is it Kamari? We haven't even touched on Carter Gilmore, who continues to do some nice things, especially on the defensive end. Also had a great. I mean, he misses the dunk, then he comes back and has the and one. But I feel like it has to be Kamari, and his shooting is maybe the biggest surprise for me.
Yes, it is. But I'd like to just toss a vote in here for the man pictured in the chyron here of Jack Janicki, because maybe it's the dunk by itself that earns a little oh wow factor. But just going into the year again, I did not have him in the rotation because of how many guards they had and what was possible with all these point guards. It's a guy who came without a scholarship, certainly an excellent high school player, but it became very clear in the preseason with the rotations and what he was doing in some of those practices that he was going to have a role. I know it's not huge. I know there are games where he might play 7 minutes and not score and miss a shot. But I at least think he deserves a mention, just because I don't know that there's anybody outside of the program that really was even considering him for a role before this season. And here he is making a significant impact.
Yeah. John Blackwell during media day actually mentioned him. And I was asking him, like, is there somebody that stands out that for whatever reason is going to surprise people? And John Blackwell said, my roommate, Jack Janicki. And that's exactly what has happened. And I look at that dunk, and it was, I had to break out the Shaq gif of, I owe you an apology. I was not familiar with your game, because it was an absolute, like, they said afterwards that they knew that he had that in him. Like, that's what Kamari was saying afterwards, but I had no idea. And again, that's because I didn't watch a ton of him in high school. So maybe he was extremely bouncy in high school and I just missed it. But I was expecting a layup, and potentially a blocked layup, because I think that there have been some times when he's been out on the run where it hasn't necessarily gone his way. But there was no doubt in his mind he was going to go up, and if he missed it, he missed it. But he jammed it on the guy's head. Should have gotten an and one, but just a hell of a play, and totally caught me off guard. Really caught me off guard.
Yeah. He's been great for them in the role that he's had. Again, I know it's not huge statistically, but that's what it takes to move a program forward and do something a little bit different, is guys that maybe come out of nowhere and give you something extra.
The guy that we haven't talked about is Max Klesmit, who, and we haven't even mentioned the bigs, because I think they were, I mean, how many shots did they even take inside? Like, someone sent me a text or a question that said they took one shot inside the paint yesterday.
Yeah, well, let's see.
Stephen Crowell didn't take a shot, and Nolan Winter took one shot inside the paint, because the other one was, or I should say inside the 3-point line, because the other two were 3-pointers.
That's right. That's
crazy. You put up 83 and your two bigs combined for, 0 points inside the paint, and Stephen Crowell doesn't score. So either way, what was I asking about? Oh yeah. Max Klesmit, who rolled his ankle a little bit there, and then his shooting slump, I feel like it's still very much in a slump, but he hit some nice shots from the outside as well to partake in that 17 3-point barrage that they put up. But Max's ankle, I think, is something that needs to be at least watched.
Yeah,
because they need him defensively, and I think eventually we're going to see his scoring or his 3-point prowess, I think is the word I would use, come out. He's too good of a shooter not to break out of that.
You know, he's been having a rough year when he buries that 3 from the right wing. Yes, thank the heavens, finally one went in. Sometimes that's what it takes. We say this every show. We've seen what is possible for him. Now time is running out, but he can get hot in any game, and if he does, look out.
Yeah, he's shooting 28%, almost 29% from 3, which is not who he is as a career shooter. So I think it has to, and it'll probably, it'll probably happen in March, just like it kind of did last year, where he essentially was one of the few people that was able to hit any shots against James Madison, and he was also really, really good against Illinois too, in the Big Ten championship game. So I feel like we haven't heard I don't want to say the last of Max as a shooter, but I certainly think he's got more good in his game left to show up. So for you, when you see the numbers for the bigs, is that like a concern, or is it just because every time Stephen Crowell got the ball, they were throwing the immediate double team at him?
Well, that was certainly part of it. Anytime they touched the post, you could tell what Nebraska's strategy was. I'm not concerned in a game like this when you take 30 plus threes and make 17 of them and win by 25 plus points. If this came in a 2-point loss that was 65-63 and you absolutely needed your bigs to be dominant, that would be a problem. And we've seen Steven, the good and the bad, a game where he has no rebounds and then he rips off multiple games in a row of double figure scoring, has a double-double. So this one doesn't concern me, but there will be others that if this happens, you got problems.
I mean, I guess Nebraska just had to take away something, but once Wisconsin's struggling from the outside the way that you do, don't you have to adjust? Like, okay, Steven Crowell is going to get his points inside, but we have to stop Wisconsin from beating us from deep. And Nebraska gives up a ton of threes, has given up a ton of threes all year, but yeah, I mean, Frank, you have to do something to take away something offensively. And all they did was just throw double teams at Steven Crowell and let him pass it to an open guy.
Yeah, well,
that's why they're Nebraska.
Wisconsin also had some tough threes, ones where Hoiberg's throwing up his hands. Like, what can we do? But
that was later in the game. And Greg Gard talks about this all the time, and I think it makes complete sense. You let them get a few easy ones. You let them get their confidence up. The tougher ones become much easier.
Yeah. It was not Nebraska's finest effort. They're not a good basketball team.
All right. Do we want to jump into some listener questions here?
Let's do it.
All right. Let's start with Luke. He says, true or false? Wisconsin will finish the year 4th or higher in the Big Ten standings. Currently, 4th.
I'm going to say false.
I don't know why I shouldn't have done this. Overreaction, no. Wisconsin will finish the year 4th or higher in the Big Ten.
I'm going to say that is.
Do you want me to give you a recap on what exactly overreaction or no means?
No. Just need to think it through.
You know what? I shouldn't even said that because now people are going to think I hate you again. So
we text a lot, guys. I promise.
Yes, this is not a Mike and Mike situation.
No.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think they'll be just below that threshold, just because I think there's a lot of tough games coming up. But it's not going to matter to me either way. Like you look at some of these NCAA tournament projections, they're creeping up to as high. CBS had them as a 4 seed. Minardi had them as a 5, though that was before the weekend. They don't have any bad losses. I think they're 4-4 against quad 1 teams, but they're 12-0 against quad 2, 3, and 4 teams. So they've obviously put themselves in really good position. I think maybe they end up 5th, but to me, it's negligible.
I mean, their doubles are Iowa, Illinois, and Minnesota. And Minnesota's actually started to play a little bit better. They've won 3 straight. But Iowa, and then you get Illinois at home, and then you obviously have some other tougher games, Michigan State and Purdue and all that. You haven't played the top of the conference yet outside of Michigan, right? I mean, they haven't played Purdue, haven't played Michigan State. They get Maryland this week. They lost to Illinois. They haven't played Oregon. So and obviously lost to UCLA. So they have of the top 8 in the conference, they have not beaten any of them. Is that accurate? That is accurate. I guess, top 8 includes them, but all the teams with a winning record in the conference, they haven't beaten anybody with a winning record at the conference. What's up?
I certainly think they're going to get some of them, but yeah, you mentioned it. That closing stretch is really difficult, and that's kind of where the teams will be separated here.
They will be. Where Cone Roller asks, where does this team rank for teams in the guard era?
Well, most entertaining.
Is it easily the most entertaining?
To me, it is. I know this is a hard question to answer. Like the one that he took over on the interim basis because of the circumstances and because of where they were so down in the Big Ten to then make a run and get to the second weekend. That might always be number 1 until he does something greater than that, makes an Elite 8 or a Final Four if he's able to accomplish that. But for pure entertainment value, this one's pretty high. The 2020 team that will never, the fictional national championships.
What's fictional about it?
They never got to play it.
Yeah, but ESPN ESPN said their computers made them the national champion.
Do they have a banner for that? They should.
They should. They should.
There's been some good teams, and the problem in answering this is, and it's not unfair, is you don't get your answer for 2 more months, because they can be a top 10. The last 2 teams were top 10 teams in January and fizzled, and you don't remember them because they were 6th in the AP poll on January 4th. You remember them because they didn't win back-to-back games the rest of the way and got embarrassed against James Madison. So, but as of now, I would put this near the top, if not at the top, just because of the way they're playing and the things they're able to do. Is just, last year was the start of it, and this year is a continuation in a way we have not seen.
Yeah. Again, it's going to be interesting to see how they play against the better teams in the conference. Like that's what they're going to be judged on. They haven't played the great teams yet in the conference. The ones they have played, they haven't beaten. So that is, I think, still a huge question mark out there. And until you see some of that, it's hard to place them. But when I think about the best guard teams, that 2020 team, if gotten to play, I think makes it to the second weekend and maybe further. So that is how good they were playing at that time. This team desperately needs, and I don't know, it's just because every time I see a 5 next to anybody's name, you're just waiting for 12, right? So they desperately just need to not be that this year. Like, be a 6, be a 4, be a 3, be a 6. Don't be a 4. Don't be a 5. Don't be a 5, because it just feels, and they haven't lost every game that they've been as a 5, but it feels like they have. All right, it has a chance, right, to be the best.
Very much so. Yeah.
Todd says, seemed like the Nebraska game, Greg Gard preferred to go small with Gilmore playing more minutes than Crowell and Winter. Ball just moves better with smaller guards, forwards, and having the big guys take the lead. Your thoughts?
At times, yeah. It depends on the matchup. Crowell played, 20 minutes? Something like that. I mean, he hasn't played a ton of minutes this season, but...
Well, I mean, they which is, I think, actually ended up being okay for him. He played 21 minutes, and Nolan Winter played... Crowell played 20 minutes. Nolan Winter played 17, and Gilmore played 21.
Yeah. It depends on the game, but yeah, obviously, I think they do some things better when they have smaller lineups. But I think it's just dependent on the type of team that they're playing. Nebraska likes to get up and down, likes to shoot some threes. And maybe the minute rotation would have been different if it was a closer game. I don't know.
Sam asks, do you think turnovers are an issue for this team?
Can be at times. But
when you're playing the way you are, I think it can be.
When you have more possessions per game and you're a little faster tempo than you're used to being, you're bound to commit a handful of more turnovers. But I think you're also able to overcome them because of where they're at shooting. So I don't know that there's a ton of games that I say they lost that because they didn't have the handle. They had way too many turnovers. And I think there's been maybe 1 or 2. But as of now, I don't think it's the biggest concern.
So just like trying to go and look it up, they are still in the top 50 in terms of fewest turnovers per game. They're averaging 10.4 a game, which is 35th in the country. I mean, you're right. It certainly can be a problem. And, John Blackwell can get a little bit loose with it at times. Mm-hmm. But considering the points that you're scoring, and you said they are playing, a little bit faster than they have in the past, you're going to have more opportunities for turnovers. But yeah, that it certainly can be an issue. I think that is certainly fair. All right. So all these other questions were about Daniel Freitag, and I think we discussed Daniel Freitag already, right? Sam was saying, can you talk about Daniel Freitag? It's clear that he is not playing because why change when the team is this good? But are we confident he's the guy starting next year?
No, I'm not confident he's the guy starting next year. I do think it's hard to get inside the mind of a player because they can say the right things, much like Connor did when he did have opportunities to talk last season. And it was also clear that there's probably a future for you somewhere else. But Daniel does have an especially close relationship with Greg, and that mattered in this recruiting process because he could have gone any number of places. It was the highest rated point guard that Gard had been able to sign. If you're able to have those honest conversations about why you're not playing and where you need to go to get to that level, and you believe in that, then you stay. If you are unaccustomed to facing adversity and you want to leave at the first sign of that, then you go. But it is a process, and it's hard to know exactly because of the era that we're in. I do remember talking to him in the summer before he got here after the Chucky Hepburn stuff, um, and him talking about wanting to be at a place for the long haul. But it's easy to say that at that time, and it's a different set of circumstances. I do think he'll be here, but I can't definitively say he's going to be a starter because there's a long way to go between now and putting yourself in that position. First, you have to, I think, be a part of the rotation and get actual minutes. And when we've seen, like, yeah, he is explosive and dynamic as any player, but the game is just, it's much faster at this level, and the decision making doesn't seem to fully be there right now in terms of being able to take care of the basketball and not try to hit the home run in one play. And from a skill level standpoint, obviously it's there. So no, I don't know if it's a starter next year, but he does seem to have the mindset and approach of someone who would want to be here long term. We'll see.
What'd you think about Ricardo Greppi's dunk?
Not familiar with the game. Yeah.
No, he dunked it, and he also hung on the rim for a little bit after he made it. I thought, I couldn't remember the last time if he had scored yet this year because he missed obviously some time with that injury. But I feel like in a closer game that may have been a I don't know. Alex was the one that told me or pointed me towards that 2-point attempts, just having one 2-point attempt from the bigs inside the 2-point attempts. I feel like he asked if that ever happened before. I'm guessing probably not.
What, where your two bigs have just one?
He said, do you think the Badgers have ever had a game with fewer 2-point attempts from their starting 4 and 5, where they went 0 for 1?
I don't know.
I feel like no is the answer, but obviously I can't be sure. It just feels like a question I would answer no to, and I would have no idea how to look that up.
You'd have to go game by game. It would take a lot of work.
Which is, I'm committed, but I'm not that committed.
Yeah.
You're right. So, all right. I wanted to bring one more thing up, unless we give you a little shout out here. You're working on a little John Blackwell story. I
am. Yeah. I think the crux of it is maybe haven't written it yet, so sometimes it can be tough. I promise I'm going to start on that soon. The relationship that he has with his dad and the dynamic there. Glenn Blackwell obviously played at Illinois, and I had a chance to talk to Glenn, and I thought he said something really interesting because he wasn't drafted, but made it pretty far in the free agent process to try to make an NBA team. Initially, you kind of you practice with the vets, and then all of a sudden word spreads, oh, this guy can shoot. You go to the summer league, and he was with the Seattle Supersonics and made it all the way to I think some event in Tennessee. And they said that they just got done playing the Chicago Bulls, and he went and met with coach, who I believe was Bernie Bickerstaff at the time. And he learned that he was not going to make the next round, or was going to be cut. And they actually wanted him to go down and play in maybe it was the CBA. And he ended up going back to finish his degree at Illinois, played 8 years overseas. But I thought he said something that was really interesting, is he wanted John to kind of learn some of the things that he was not able to achieve at that level, that he was a really good catch and shoot guy, but didn't necessarily have the ball handling ability. And so he didn't want John to be in that situation where the limitations his dad had prevented him from taking that next step. And you see the type of player that John is. He is a true combo guard. He can play off the ball. He was a point guard in high school. And this is a really difficult spot to be in, where you're handling the ball as the point guard, even if you aren't necessarily a true PG. But he's been able to do it very well. Maybe the assist to turnover ratio notwithstanding, I'm not going to hold it against him because it's not necessarily the primary role that he was expected to have. But the leap he's made from freshman to sophomore year has been really incredible, doubling his point output and the responsibilities that he had. And he and his dad are really close. I mean, he showed me his cell phone, and his dad, like, every day sends him like voice messages through text or videos of, like, tough game last night, blah, blah, blah. Here's some basketball stuff to work on. And obviously it's helped tremendously to have someone like that in his corner, and the rest of his family as well. Yeah, no, that's going to be great. Looking forward to you actually sitting down and writing that and then getting it out. No, his game, obviously, very, very impressive. Do you think Wisconsin's had a 1-2 like him and John Tonje before? Like, we know, like, yes. Go back to the Final Four teams, right? Like with Decker and Kaminsky, and like you have two potential number one scorers, right?
but like guys that can take over games. And I guess maybe they've had that at other stretches too. But in terms of like two wings that, and I know John is playing the point guard spot, but he's big enough. He could play the wing if they needed to, and John Tonje obviously as well. But have they had two of those guys on the same team at the same time?
That's tougher to say. I was going to think back in the last decade. Certainly, the number one duo is Decker and Kaminsky. They're both first-round NBA draft picks, which doesn't happen at Wisconsin. When Bronson Koenig was here, and you had a guy like Nigel Hayes, but that's not, it's a forward and that's a point guard. So a couple guard wings.
Well, they essentially had three though, right? Because you could throw Ethan Happ on that list too, in terms of with Nigel and Bronson. A lot of different options. But those guys weren't scoring 20 a game on a regular basis.
Yeah, very few players at Wisconsin over the years have been 20 a game type
different
guys.
offenses, I guess.
Johnny Davis was pretty close, but it's kind of a different era. So yeah, it's definitely special to have that kind of combination where you go back to the game where Tonje didn't score at all. If someone would have said before the game, okay, your leading scorer is going to get no points on the road, you'd think, oh, no shot. Well, Blackwell goes off. What do you have, 27, 28, something like that? And that's why this team has a chance to be special.
Yeah, for sure. One more thing before we go. Did you see Mick Cronin's comments the other day about having to like the travel and how big of a pain in the butt it is? And he was saying, oh, we had to go out to the East Coast. We saw the Statue of Liberty 3 times in like a week or something like that. Because they played at Maryland and they played at Rutgers. I looked at their schedule and they obviously have, when they go on the road, they play like 2 games, right? That's what they do, because it is the travel is a little bit different. Wisconsin obviously did the same thing, but his comments were about, it's real tough for the Midwest teams and the East Coast teams to have to come out here and be in 70-degree weather for like a week to play UCLA and USC. It's so tough. And he was, he's complaining about it. And then Greg Gard, who was not asked specifically about Mick Cronin's comments or anything else related to those, he was talking about how they have to play 6 games, or he's asked about 6 road games over an 8-game stretch. That's kind of the stretch that they're in right now. And it was a winding answer, but it eventually got to the point where he was like, we're playing basketball. There's much more difficult things in life that you could be doing than changing time zones playing basketball. And a lot of people took it as a shot at Mick Cronin. Maybe it was. I don't know. I don't know either way. But he was like, I don't make a big deal out of it because it's not a big deal. Maybe it's easier for him to say that being in the Midwest and not having as long of flights, which I get. And he's the only, like, the double ups that they have to play, or the only times that they have to be on the road for 2 games at a time, is when they went out to USC and UCLA. But they're staying at really nice hotels. They're not staying in these horrible conditions, and they're not sitting on a bus like all this time. I know it's difficult. I get it, but it's also basketball, and it's not. I feel like just making it way, way too hard and just making too many excuses for your guys. If you're Mick Cronin.
Mick Cronin is spending an awful lot of energy on something that is not moving the program forward. I understand some of what he was saying. One of the complaints was, hey, we're finishing this game. When we get home, it's going to be 2 or 3 a.m. We're supposed to play a game 48 hours later, and our opponent didn't play since last Wednesday, so they probably got Thursday off. They got to spend Friday preparing for us. On the other hand, it probably evens out over time. And what good does that do? Is that going to change something moving forward? You know who's going to hear that? Your players. And then they're going to be thinking about something like that as opposed to trying to win games. Maybe it is different if you're on the coast. If you're in the Midwest, you're centralized. And so the trips aren't necessarily as far. I give Greg credit for his answer. He's not wrong. It's a hell of a lot better conditions than when I played, which was like the worst conditions you could possibly have. We'd do a Friday night, Saturday afternoon game on the road. We would have 4 people to a hotel room, so 2 people in each bed because we had no money. And our stipend would be like to go get Burger King or something. You want to talk about really not being in a great spot to win games on the road. It was that after the 6-hour bus ride. Wisconsin's doing a little better than that. So I'm on Team Greg for this all the way.
And it followed up a comment from Giannis Antetokounmpo when they had to fly on the game day into Milwaukee because of the snowstorm down in New Orleans. And so they didn't, for whatever reason, he was asked about it, like the adversity that they overcame by having to get on a flight and fly and then play like 2 hours later after they got home. And he's like, I don't really view that as adversity. I played in a lot tougher conditions than that. So, yeah, I mean, you're staying at what kind of hotel? It's a private charter. Like, same thing with Wisconsin. It's all private. It's not like you have to go into an airport and, deal with all the stuff that comes with that. Like, it's just stop.
I know this isn't about me, although media has an M and an Ian. And I once got stuck in a ditch in the snow on the way to a game and had to be pulled out and got there late. That's adversity.
And that was also the game that your first starting game that you're supposed to start that night.
See, you have your first start. So, I'll give you some stories on the Division III level. These guys have it easy.
See, a friend would not, a non-friend wouldn't have remembered that. But
see, there you go.
Yep. Remember that story. All right. So Wisconsin's at Maryland on Wednesday, and it's a big one as Maryland's started to play some good ball, and it's at Maryland, and we'll see how Wisconsin fares. Jesse, thank you very much.
Thanks, Zach.
All right. There he is, Jesse Temple from The Athletic. You've been listening to The Swing.